Hey everybody, welcome back to All Fiction is Fantasy. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, and welcome to a very large book haul. So this is just about all of the books I've purchased since the last book haul. I think that was about 5 months ago, or the last book haul video. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff. This is going to this is probably going to be a pretty long video. So I guess sit back, relax, and look at all of the stuff that I've gotten in, and I can't wait to read. Oh my God, my to read shelves are just way, 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 way too big, overflowing. But anyways, let's start with this stack here. We actually have there's actually some new fiction in this book haul, and I don't buy a lot of new fiction, so that should be kind of exciting, right? Coming up first here is from Eric LaRocca, and this is called You've Lost a Lot of Blood. I think this looks really interesting. I don't really know too much about it. I just got it based off of a quick kind of Amazon glance. It seems a little bit kind of like an a work of experimental fiction. It's broken up into weird chapters and weird parts with some imagery and I don't know, some poetry inside, but it's not short stories. Each precious thing I show you in this book is a holy relic from the night we both perished, the night when I combed you from my hair and watered the moon with your blood. You've lost a lot of blood. So I don't know. I think that sounds pretty interesting. Here we have a book that I actually picked up when I went to a new bookstore. I went to Barnes and Noble not too long ago and had a really good time. It kind of energized me to go back to new bookstores more frequently. And there were some really cool things out. And I thought this looked really interesting. It's called Tiny Nightmares, Very Short Tales of Horror. And that's edited by Lincoln Michael and Nadia Alexelli Nieto. New stories from Samantha Hunt, Jack Jemk, Stephen Graham Jones, Ryan Amilcar Scott, and more. So I just thought this looked interesting. These are a whole bunch of new horror authors who I am not familiar with. And these are really short little kind of longer than flash fiction, but very, very short little tales. And I am looking forward to reading these and hopefully discovering some new things, because if there is one genre that I think continues to get better, it's modern horror. Modern horror is amazing. I don't like very much modern fantasy. I like even fewer works of modern science fiction, but modern horror is really cool. And speaking of modern horror, this is a author who I have been told over and over again I need to read by a couple friends and by just seeing people online talk about her. But Hailey Piper. So this is The Worm and His Kings. It's a work of cosmic horror. And I think this sounds really interesting. New York City, 1990. When you slip through the cracks, no one is there to catch you. Monique learns that the hard way after her girlfriend, Donna, vanishes without a trace. But I've heard a lot of really great things from Hailey Piper. And I also got her book here, The Queen of Teeth. And this sounds really, really interesting as well, kind of twisted and dark, and also kind of a work of cosmic horror. So looking forward to reading both of those and diving into Hailey Piper. I think I'm going to like her quite a bit from what I have read about her. Recently at Half Price Books, I picked up this work of Sword and Sorcery from DMR, and this is by J. Christopher Tarpey, and this is the God Blade there. And I believe Tarpey is a singer or guitarist or songwriter in a heavy metal band, because I do know that DMR Books does publish stories written by members of heavy metal bands. And so this is kind of a work of Sword and Sorcery there, the God Blade. And I thought that sounded pretty interesting. This gentleman here, Mark Samuels, I believe that he recently died. I follow Matthew M. Bartlett on Facebook. And if you're on Facebook, he's a really good follow. And I saw some people talking about Mark Samuels, and I have never read him before. And I thought this sounded really interesting. The Witch Cult Abbey. And so I did want to pick up something by him and do that. I don't know if his stuff is collectible. I'm not sure. This just kind of came up when I did a search as a good place to start for Mark Samuel. So that is The Witch Cult Abbey. Next up, we have a novel by S. Craig Zahler. So S. Craig Zahler, for those of you who don't know, he is a very interesting film director, and he also writes some from what I can tell, some interesting like pulp style fiction and some darker Western stuff and some crime fiction. I love his movies. We have what is it? Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, and Dragged Across Concrete. I just watched Dragged Across Concrete for the second time the other night, and I loved it even more. Very interesting guy. One of the few kind of like right-wing filmmakers in Hollywood today, and I guess you could say he's controversial. Dragged Across Concrete actually stars Mel Gibson as a racist cop. Hey, what do you know? But it's a super bleak, nihilistic movie, man. Let me tell you. And I've heard that same kind of stuff about his fiction. So this is called Wraths of the Broken Land, and this is kind of a brutal, brutal Western from what I have heard. Very, very violent. But looking forward to checking out some of his fiction. And speaking of Matthew M. Bartlett, we do have this book here, Terror in 16 Bits. So this is actually a book that I bought from him, and I believe he signed his story. So I know he has a story in here, and he was selling a bunch of stuff that he had that he hasn't sold yet. And this is all horror fiction kind of based off of video games. And I thought it sounded pretty interesting here. Demons stalk the circuit boards. Phantoms roam the arcade. Programmers embed occult secrets into the code. Madness spreads from player to player like a virus. Virtual and augmented reality are haunted by unspeakable forces. Doom-cursed warriors live and die again and again in bloody and brutal fashion. The denizens of a tortured cyberworld begin to wake up and get very, very angry. We have Matthew M. Bartlett. Do I recognize any of these other authors? I don't think so. So another really cool anthology to maybe discover some new modern horror authors for me. And then a couple other new things. Let's just kind of cherry pick the new things here. So Old Moon is a newer kind of zine, a newer anthology of sword and sorcery, of new sword and sorcery. And so I picked up volumes 1 and volumes 2 of that. And we have a number of stories here. And I have no idea what these are like. I don't think I've heard of any of the authors. Paula Hammond, Graham Thomas Wilcox, Carries Crossan, and Mob. And then in volume 2 here, we have Jonathan Olfert, Gabriella Officer Darvasa, Jason Ray Carney, and Matthew Castleman. And then we also have a couple interviews, one with DM Ritzland from DMR Books. So these are, I believe, printed on demand from Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm trying to see what's going on in some new works of sword and sorcery. So that's why I picked these up there. Speaking of some more new stuff, let's shuffle these around. This finally came out in paperback, so I'm really looking forward to this. Garth Marenghi's Terror Tome, of course, written by Garth Marenghi, the fake character from Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. And so this is the book that Garth Marenghi wrote when horror writer Nick Steen gets sucked into a cursed typewriter by the terrifying typeface, Dark Lord of the Prolix. The hellish visions inside his head are unleashed for real. Forced to fight his escaping imagination, now leaking out of his own brain, Nick must defend the town of Stockford from his own fictional horrors, including serial killer Nelson Strain and Nick's dreaded Throppelganger, not a doppelganger, but a Throppelganger, the Dark Third. Can he and Roz, his frequently incorrect female editor, hunt down these incarnate denizens of Nick's rampaging imaginata before they destroy Stockford, outer Stockford, and possibly slightly further? So I'm hoping this is at least half as funny as Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. So that should be a really fun read. Something else new here is the oral history of David Lynch's Dune, and that is a masterpiece in disarray from Max Every. This is a giant tome. I think it's nearly 600 pages here, 516 pages, all kinds. There's photography and interviews and just all kinds of things about David Lynch's Dune, his kind of flawed interpretation, his flawed reimagining of Dune. I'm kind of a fan of David Lynch's Dune. I think it's at least interesting, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the process of the making of David Lynch's Dune. Something kind of new here. And this is Confessions of a Puppet Master. So this is Charles Band's autobiography, written with Adam Felber. And I'm sure most of the people here are familiar with Charles Band, Full Moon Video, Full Moon Motion Pictures. So he makes lots of kind of D grade, B grade, C grade movies, lots of horror movies and science fiction and weird low budget fantasy. So anybody who was available or who rented movies at the video store in the late 80s and 90s, and even from the beginning of the video days, knows about Charles Band. He seems like a pretty interesting guy, and I always like when he's interviewed. He's been on the Joe Bob Briggs show every once in a while talking about his movies when they show them there. And so I just wanted to pick this up so I can learn some more about Charles Band, because I watched a lot of his movies growing up. And I still like some of them today. I think the Puppet Master movies are a lot of fun. And he's produced a ton of great movies. Really interesting guy there. And now let's see here. Let's look at this, at Weird Tales. So this is 100 Years of Weird Tales. This is a really, really nice book here. And it has all kinds of new stuff and classic reprints with articles and essays and imagery, photographs and art, all about Weird Tales. This is just such a fantastic book. It's super well made. It feels really nice. I highly, highly recommend this book. Just a beautiful kind of, just a beautiful kind of testament to Weird Tales and its power and its a lasting power. So we get all kinds of things. There is a really cool, I wonder if I can find it. It's a really cool Sword and Sorcery essay. Yes, the Sword and Sorcery, The Weird Tales and Beyond, a reprinted essay by Charles R. Rutledge. So really cool. Worms of the Earth, a classic reprint, of course, from Robert E. Howard. But yeah, if you are into Weird Tales and you want this nice kind of like historical book here that has lots of covers and art and just things about Weird Tales and includes a whole bunch of fiction, both new and old, I can highly, highly recommend this book. I think it's a very, very nicely produced thing. And speaking of that, I did recently pick up the Dagon collection, edited by Nate Pedersen. And so one of my favorite collections of mythos fiction is called the Starry Wisdom Library. And that is a collection of short stories that is presented as writings for an auction for all of the esoteric fiction that has appeared in the pages of various works of weird fiction over the years, like the Necronomicon and so on. The Dagon collection is presented as the write-ups for a bunch of relics and items that were confiscated from Innsmouth when the feds raided Innsmouth. And so a bunch of different authors each took a piece, each took something here like this statue of an unknown deity and wrote up a auction description for that item. And I love the Starry Wisdom Library so much. It's one of my favorite collections of all time. And this looks to be just as interesting. So I'm really happy that I finally got to pick this up. And let's see, do we have anything else new? We have a few new things, some comic books. So I have been collecting these H.P. Lovecraft comic books. that are manga and written and drawn by Guo Tanabe. And so we have parts 1 and parts 2 of In the Mountains of Madness. We have the Shadow over Innsmouth, and then also this older volume here, and that is The Hound and Other Stories. I got to tell you the truth, guys. These adaptations here are the way that I prefer now to experience H.P. Lovecraft. I think these are amazing. This interpretation, this adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness is so dang good. It is just, oh, it's awesome. I love it. I love his art. I think he captures the spirit of H.P. Lovecraft so well in the art and in the writing. And I cannot recommend these enough. At the Shadow over Innsmouth is also fantastic. And I'm so happy to have these. I hope that I'm not sure how many of these Tanabe has done, but I will continue to buy them as they come out because I think they are so cool. Okay, so I got completely done with the book haul and realized that I forgot a small stack of books, and it actually contains some really cool stuff. One thing I am so happy to own now. I'm going to insert this somewhere in the middle of the video because I did want to highlight these. But that is one of them. Here is a collection from Henry Kuttner. So Henry Kuttner wrote quite a few mythos tales, and he was a weird fiction author. He was part of that original Lovecraft circle, and he also wrote some sword and sorcery. And he wrote 2 stories that I absolutely love. And those feature a character called Prince Raynor. So this is a old kind of chapbook from Griffin Books, and this is both of the Prince Raynor stories. And so this thing is pretty cool, from 1987. Very kind of DIY and kind of, I don't know, indie, I guess. But yeah, so I'm super happy to own this. Another book that I got when I was on that trip to Oregon with my parents, I did end up picking up a really nice hardback copy of the Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is a fantastic kind of sequel that Victor LaValle wrote to H.P. Lovecraft's The Horror at Red Hook. Is that what it's called? The Horror at Red Hook, I think. But yeah, really, really good. I've read this before, one of the Tor novellas, but this is a really nice hardcover version that I just wanted because this is something that I want to keep forever. And I do really like this book, and the dust jacket just has a really nice feel to it. It's really high quality, has a really cool texture to it. This is another book that I learned about while I was reading that Reader's Guide to Fantasy, and that is Daughter of the Bright Moon by Lynn Abbey. I think this sounds pretty interesting. Another kind of sword and sorcery novel here, written by a woman, start with a female character. And both of those things are kind of rare in that subgenre. So I'm trying to expand my horizons in that and read more sword and sorcery written by women. This has a massive font, which is really nice. And it has some amazing illustrations. And who are the illustrations done by? Let's see. Steve Fabian. Hey, wow. I guess I didn't realize that. But yeah, Steve Fabian. Awesome. Very cool. We were just talking about him earlier in the video or later in the video. He did a lot of art for Arkham House. So really nice. I'm very happy with this. And then speaking of Henry Kuttner, I also picked up the Book of Iod. And this is some of his mythos tales, along with a few other authors here. So we have a few stories from Kuttner. And then also a story by Lynn Carter and Robert M. Price and Robert Bloch. So we have The Secret of Kralitz, The Eater of Souls, The Salem Horror, The Black Kiss, The Jest of Druma Vista, and so on, The Spawn of Dagon. So this is one of the older versions of the Chaosium books. And of course, this is edited by Robert M. Price. And then the book I'm so happy to finally own, one of my all-time holy grails. I finally found a copy that wasn't very expensive, and that is The Leopard of Poitain from Raul Garcia Capella. So this is an interesting book here. It doesn't look very interesting, that's for sure. Looks pretty boring, but doesn't even have a synopsis on the dust jacket there. But the Leopard of Poitaines are sword and sorcery stories starring this character called Arkell of Argos, and Capello wrote about him in a fan magazine devoted to Conan called Amra. And this character existed in Conan's world and kind of adventures close to Conan. You can kind of say this is almost like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead for sword and sorcery, because Arkell is kind of maybe sent on missions by Conan or is adventuring in tandem with Conan, but Conan is never mentioned. And these stories could probably be seen as maybe early works of fan fiction, but they are very, very good. I've only read one of these stories, so I should say one of them is very, very good. I know that, and that is Tutoral, or Turatal. I'm sorry, Turatal. And Turatal I have covered. I read that in, I think it's Wizards and Warlocks. I think that's what it's called, in a sword and sorcery anthology edited by L. Sprague de Camp. And I love that story so much. And this is the only book, I believe, that Capello put out. It's pretty rare. It's getting harder and harder to find. It was originally published in 1985 by Celt Press or Celt Press. And yeah, I am so happy to have this. I am really looking forward to reading this. I'm probably going to read this after I finish up the Swords of Ramelin series and after I read and review the Brian Lumley sword and sorcery stuff. So, all right, guys. Well, I just wanted to make sure I showed these because I'm really happy to have especially these two in my collection. These are kind of rarer volumes, and yeah, these are kind of prized possessions now. So, all right, guys. Well, you can go back to the rest of the video now. Bye-bye. Okay, now let's take a look at some new novelizations. So I've been continuing to collect novelizations, and this one here I'm very, very happy to finally own, and that is the novelization for Buckaroo Banzai, and that is written by Earl Mock Rauch. This is a really interesting novelization in that. So if you guys remember Buckaroo Banzai, when they presented the movie, they presented it as if there had been other adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. It was kind of presented as, what is it, like episode 10 or episode 8 or something. And there was the continuing adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, but that was the only movie. It wasn't really anything else. But in this novelization for Buckaroo Banzai, the author actually includes footnotes that reference the other adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. And so he creates this kind of this existence of all of this other fiction for Buckaroo Banzai. And I think that's pretty cool. Where are some of those footnotes here? Yeah, so the survival probability for Buckaroo Banzai in his attempt to pilot the jet car through solid matter, 52%. Where's some of the ones where he does discuss some of the other, he'll say something like, please see these volumes of the adventures of Buckaroo Banzai and things like that. So it's created this whole kind of fake history of the character. And I think that's kind of what they were going for in the movie. And it kind of, I think maybe they failed to really live up to that. But, oh yeah, so let's see, what does this say? How Buckaroo Banzai knew this or various other details about the electroids of which the reader will become aware, I'm at a loss to say. One can only assume the phone call from the father's ship somehow imparted this information. So what a creative, it just looks like a really creative novelization. Maybe one of the most creative novelizations that I have seen. So that should be a lot of fun to read. An old internet friend of mine did send me this novelization by John Russo, and that is The Night of the Living Dead, based on the screenplay by George Romero and John Russo. So that should be a really fun read. I never knew that this was made into a novel before, but my buddy, he knew that I was starting to collect novelizations, and he's had this for a long time, and so he sent it to me. So looking forward to seeing how this is different than the movies. Night of the Living Dead is my favorite of the Romero movies, of his zombie movies. One of my all-time favorite movies and favorite directors is not John Woo, but Ronnie Yu. Ronnie Yu, his Hong Kong movie, The Bride with White Hair, is a masterpiece. And his movie, Freddy vs. Jason, I think is also a masterpiece. I love Freddy vs. Jason. It's my favorite Freddy movie, and it's my favorite Jason movie. And I am so excited to read this novelization. I hope it contains some different kind of gore and death scenes, or maybe some extended scenes. So that should be a lot of fun to read. Gremlins 2 here. And who was Gremlins 2? A novelization by David Bishop. Oh, who wrote Freddy vs. Jason? Stephen Hand. And then Gremlins 2. So I'm sure fans of Gremlins 2 just know what a crazy, crazy movie Gremlins 2 is. So much more bonkers than Gremlins 1. Gremlins 2 might be one of the kind of all-time great sequels. It's very interesting. And so looking forward to reading that. Total Recall by Pierce Anthony. Really one of those really funny novelizations, because the movie Total Recall, of course, was based off of the Philip K. Dick short story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. And then this is based off of the screenplay written by Ronald Shusett, Dan O'Bannon, and Gary Goldman, with a screen story by Ronald Shusett, Dan O'Bannon, and John Povall, based on the short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale from Philip K. Dick. So yeah, this is like a novelization 3 times removed or something. So should be a pretty interesting read. Again, Joan D. Vinge. So Joan D. Vinge did a lot of novelizations. We've taken a look at Return to Oz and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and here we have her novelization for Ladyhawke, a pretty interesting and cool kind of 80s fantasy movie with Matthew Broderick and Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer. So that should be pretty interesting. And then, hey, we have V here, the classic 80s science fiction about first contact with aliens and how they came to Earth and wanted to eat us because they are actually reptilians in disguise. And for those of Gen X people, we remember V very fondly. It was kind of, it was kind of like the first thing on TV like it for us. And it was very haunting when we found out that those aliens were actually reptiles. So yeah, so there's some cool new novelizations to add. We have here Robert E. Vardaman. So I am doing that review right now of the Swords of Raymond series, and this is a science fiction series that he wrote. This is an omnibus version, and that is called The Masters of Space. So I don't read as much science fiction anymore as I used to. I used to read all science fiction and very little fantasy, and now I'm just kind of in this fantasy kick. So this doesn't really look like your traditional kind of space opera science fiction. It looks more like maybe a work of fantasy in space. So I am interested in checking that out. In September, I took a trip to Oregon. I met my parents in Oregon, and we went to a little city called Seven Sisters, I believe it's called. And there were some antique stores there, and they had some really nice books. So I bought a really nice copy of The Yosemite and the Mountains of California by John Muir. I've had the Yosemite before, but this book here is just in much better condition than the one I had. I love John Muir's writing. I think his nature writing is great. And I'm from California, so I like to read about him writing about California. And both of these are very cool. I love this style of book here. I've always wanted to read a James Michener novel, and the one I wanted to read is Hawaii. So I found this in a thrift store. Looking forward to reading this kind of exhaustive historical fiction work about Hawaii. It starts all the way back in kind of the primordial days of Hawaii being formed by volcanic and geological upheaval. And all the way through, I'm not sure how far it goes, but we have all these family trees. It's just one of those huge epics. I've never read Michener, or is it Michener or Michener? I think it's Michener, but never read them. Always wanted to, so I'm going to attempt this at some point. I found a really cool copy of Venus on a Half Shell from Kilgore Trout there. So this should be interesting. Kind of a science fiction romp here. This really cool book on the history of the Elephant Man by Michael Howell and Peter Ford, now a major motion picture. So this is the true history of the Elephant Man. It contains some images of him, and yeah, this should be really cool. It's a Penguin book, and The Elephant Man, one of my favorite movies. Man, if you just want to cry for 2 hours straight, just throw on The Elephant Man, and you'll cry uncontrollably. I found an abridged copy of The Stand. So this isn't the first edition. It does include a callback to the Gunslinger there. I'm not sure what the printing is here. The 38th printing. The first printing was in 1980, but this is the abridged version. So this was the original version that Stephen King released before it was unabridged. And I think it's about 300 pages, 200 pages shorter. So I love that cover. I love the old signets for Stephen King. Those are what I collect with King. And I've never read the abridged version. I've only read the unabridged version of The Stand. And then a few other books here. Some kind of probably C-grade sword and sorcery. Tark and the Golden Tide by Colum McConnell. I've looked him up. He wrote a couple, maybe 2 or 3 works of sword and sorcery in the tradition of Conan from Leisure Books here. When everybody was trying to write something in the tradition of Conan. So I haven't heard very many great things, but hey, you know what? Maybe this is some kind of undiscovered gem. Who knows? Probably not, but it has a pretty good cover. And I am trying to collect as much cool old vintage sword and sorcery as possible. And then this book, of course, we've taken a look at on the channel. I bought this in Oregon, and this was the best book I read in 2023, and that is In Watermelon Sugar by Richard Brautigan. I'm still thinking about it some 5 months or so after I've read it. Fantastic. And then I also picked up A Confederate General from Big Sur by Richard Brautigan. Okay, so that stack is done. Let's take a look at this stack here. This is a kind of just a variety stack here. I saw this, I think I saw this on Instagram, and I just thought it looked interesting. David Van Meter Smith. It's called Trinity Grove. An ancient mystery inhabits the evil wood and unspeakable terror. I have no idea what this is about, but I liked the cover and I thought it sounded interesting. Terror grows in Trinity Grove. The forces of an ancient malevolence congregate on the outskirts of the real world. I picked up some Sean Hudson novels. I think we've talked about The Skull before. The Skull, Slugs, Breeding Ground. So just a great kind of 80s supermarket. I call it supermarket horror. I think people today call them paperbacks from hell, but I don't like that term because I don't like what that book did to the horror market. It destroyed it. It made all of these books way too expensive. These books you used to be able to pick up for next to nothing, and now they're like $15, $20 a piece. Ridiculous. So I call this supermarket horror because that's where they were. They were on the spinner racks at grocery stores. That's where I used to always buy them. So The Skull, pretty good. I've read Breeding Grounds. So Breeding Grounds, again, is like Slugs. I think it's part 2 to Slugs. And then Erebus, I've never read. So the author of Slugs and Spawn. I would love to find a cheap copy of Spawn. You used to be able to get them for $1 or $2, and now because of Paperbacks from Hell, that stupid book, they are like $20 or $30 for a copy of Spawn. Ridiculous. I really hope somebody doesn't write a Paperbacks from Hell about sword and sorcery. That would very much upset me. It would make my collection far more valuable, but it would also make finding them and buying them a real pain in the ass. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I will not do it. Okay, here we have one of Clive Barker's Books of Blood, Volume 3. I used to have all of these. I don't know what happened to them. I used to have at least the first 3 in this edition here. So I found this at Half Price Books the other day, and I decided to pick it up. I'd like to get all of them again. They're kind of hit and miss. Does this one have Rawhead Rex in it? Yes, Rawhead Rex there, son of Celluloid. So yeah, Clive Barker is great. I've been wanting to reread Imagica, and man, that book is so long, but it's so good. So I need to reread that at some point and make a video on it. I did pick up The Vanishing by Bentley Little. I don't have a lot of Bentley Little, but what I have, what I've read, I have enjoyed. And I've heard The Vanishing is really messed up. I've heard it's pretty disturbing. So I am looking forward to reading this. Just some good pop horror. This Clifford D. Simak for City. So I collect different editions of City. I don't have this one yet, or I didn't have it. Now I do. A real early Ace paperback here. I love that cover. If you've never read Simak, I do recommend Waystation and City. I think both of them are fantastic. City is about a future with robots and talking dogs. It's so good. Very pastoral. I think he writes kind of pastoral science fiction. He's not a great prose writer, but he has a lot of emotion, a lot of pathos in his work. So I was really, really happy to find this version of City. And then we have the collection of all of Robert E. Howard's Bran Mak Morn stories. So the complete edition here with an introduction by David Weber. And of course, this contains one of the best Robert E. Howard stories, and that is Worms of the Earth. What a fantastic mix of sword and sorcery, historical fiction, and cosmic horror slash Cthulhu mythos. Really good. And so I just wanted to make sure to get all of the Bran Mak Morn stories. And then I also picked up this, I think it's a novel, and it's written by David C. Smith and Richard Tierney. So, of course, Smith and Tierney, both kind of legendary in the sword and sorcery space, but they've done the Red Sonja novels. Richard C. Smith has done Auron. Tierney has his kind of biblical sword and sorcery characters. Swords Against Caesar, I think, was one of the collections. But yeah. So this is one of their novels for starring Bran Mak Morn. And I think I also have a Carl Edward Wagner novel written about Bran Mak Morn. So it should be pretty cool. This I recently picked up after hearing about it on a podcast, and that is Roger Zelazny's A Night in the Lonesome October. And this is the illustrated version with illustrations by Gan Wilson. Really cool illustrations, kind of abstract there, but this sounds so interesting, and I had never heard of this before. And so it's a lot of people will read this in October because there are 31 chapters for each day in October, and the chapters are really short. They're maybe 1 or 2 pages long, so you can easily read one a night or something like that. And this novel is told from the point of view of Jack the Ripper's dog. And they go out on their nightly walks and they meet all kinds of different characters. And they, I think it was like written on as some kind of bet or something. Somebody bet Zelazny that he couldn't write a book where all of the characters are despicable. And so you end up liking Jack the Ripper because he's like the least despicable or something. I don't know. It sounds really interesting. I'm just A Night in Lonesome October. I am a watchdog. My name is Snuff. I live with my master Jack outside of London now. I like Soho very much at night with its smelly fogs and dark secrets. It is silent then, and we go for long walks. Jack is under a curse from long ago and must do much of his work at night to keep worse things from happening. I keep watch while he is about. If someone comes, I howl. That's pretty disturbing there. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading this. And then this trilogy here, so another Vardaman trilogy. I'm probably going to be buying most of Vardaman's stuff, but this was Vardaman writing under the name Daniel Moran. But then here we have Robert Vardaman writing as Daniel Moran. Is he really? When the name he's writing as is smaller than his actual name? That's pretty funny here. Then that's Vardaman as Daniel Moran. So this is a trilogy called The Keys to Paradise. So if you guys remember, I didn't like Jade Demons. I stopped at book 2 out of 4. I'm on book 5 of 6 right now of Swords of Ramelin and still enjoying that quite a bit. All right, we have this stack here. So another old D&R Koontz, a really old D&R Koontz, an Ace D&R Koontz double. We have EC Tub Toyman on one side. And the reason I bought this is for Fear That Man. So one of his earlier works of kind of not sword and sorcery, but cosmic horror or possibly science fiction horror or something. I think that sounds interesting. I did finally find a nice old copy of Poul Anderson's The Broken Sword. So nice to have this in my collection. This is this cover here. Oh my God, that is so terrible. But Bruce Sterling, I have a list of some classic cyberpunk that I want to read. And this was one of the ones on that list. And I saw this cover and knew I just had to have it, especially with those really chintzy looking nunchucks there. And I don't know, does he have a giant pet mantis or something? I don't know. That cover is, who is that cover by? Man. Can't find it. Cover art by Bodie Wind. So yeah, that is, yeah. Bruce Sterling, cool old cyberpunk. So looking forward to that. A couple other Arkham House books I've picked up. So me and my buddy, we each picked up a copy of this, Kexis and Other Twilight Tales by Marjorie Bowen. And let's see, when did this come out? When was this published? 1976. How many copies? 4,000? I think the Arkham House are usually 4,000 copies. Yeah, 4,000 copies. It's kind of funny. So I just did that look at Brian Lumley and did kind of an overview and then also a review of the Horror at Oakdean. And Horror at Oakdean is 4,000 copies. And myself and two of my closest friends, we all have copies. So we thought that was kind of interesting how three of us have copies of a book that only 4,000 were ever made. And we all lived next to each other and we all read the same kind of fiction. So I don't know, just interesting. I will always buy an Arkham House book if I can find it for maybe under $50 or so. Speaking of Arkham House under $50, this is one of the later Arkham House books, and that is a collection of Robert Bloch stories called Flowers from the Moon and Other Lunacies. Who is this cover by? Stephen Fabian. Yep, should have guessed. So yeah, Stephen Fabian. He did a lot of covers for Arkham House. And who is this cover by? Jacket illustration by Tony Patrick. So I've recently discovered the short fiction of Robert Bloch, and I really liked it. So I wanted to pick this up. And this is a later edition. This is an Arkham House from the 90s, or 98. So I didn't know they were making books that late. But yeah, so looking forward to reading more of Robert Bloch's short fiction. And then let's see here. We've got a few more books here. So I've never read David Gemmell before. And my buddy and I, we went to a used bookstore over in Seattle. And I found this series here, the Stones of Power series, which is kind of a loosely interconnected series. The ones I'm more interested in are these weird Western. So there's 3 of them here. I think they were originally called the Jerusalem Man. So we have Wolf and Shadow, The Last Guardian, and Bloodstone. And then here we have the Ghost King and the Sword of Power. I think these are kind of like Arthurian in theming, and these are kind of weird Western in theming with some fantasy. So looking forward to reading Gemmell. I've never read them, and just looking forward to that. And one more stack here. So I did take that look recently at the Reader's Guide to Fantasy. And in that Reader's Guide to Fantasy, I discovered a whole bunch of books, but I also decided to pick up the Reader's Guide to Science Fiction to see if I could discover some new science fiction. It turns out I kind of know about all of the really great science fiction. And I was talking to my buddy about this. I think it's easier to find hidden gems in vintage fantasy than it is in science fiction. Science fiction has always been kind of more a more accepted genre than fantasy. People don't look down on science fiction as much as they do fantasy. And so I think a lot of the good fantasy kind of fell into the cracks where a lot of the good science fiction rose to the top. And so in reading through this, I was a little disappointed from the standpoint that I wasn't discovering things that I didn't know about, but the information here is good and it is solid. So I'm still glad to have this. But from the Reader's Guide to Fantasy, I did learn about Joanna Russ and her Sword and Sorcery. So I know about Joanna Russ. I know about her science fiction, which I have read, feminist work of science fiction. And this is her take on sword and sorcery, and it's called The Adventures of Alex. And I think this sounds really fascinating. So looking forward to reading this. Joanna Russ is a great author, and I'm looking forward to her interpretation of sword and sorcery from a feminist lens, from a feminist standpoint. I think it will be incredibly fascinating. And then finally, we have two more sword and sorcery series. We have from Jane Gaskell, we have the Atlan series. So we have the Serpent, Atlan, and the City. And oh man, look at those covers, just absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to reading these. Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3. It's crazy how many more pages Book 1 is. But I love those covers. Never heard of this series before. And another series here is Hawk and Fisher. This looks really cheesy, but a lot of fun. I heard this described as police procedural in Lankhmar. So we have Hawk and Fisher. Hawk and Fisher are a husband and wife team. They're police basically in a fantasy city. And so we have the first one here, Hawk and Fisher. We have Winner Takes All, The God Killer, Wolf in the Fold, Guard Against Dishonor, and The Bones of Heaven. So yeah, that should be a lot of fun. I've heard the writing isn't very good. It's so basic. It's kind of almost like first chapter book style writing. But I don't know if they're trying to go for some kind of pseudo neo-noir style vibe, or if it's just written at just kind of a very low level. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping they're at least entertaining. That's what I'm hoping for. I think they look interesting. And yeah, kind of classic 80s fantasy sword and sorcery stuff here. So, all right, you guys. Well, hey, I hope you enjoyed that very long book haul video. And let me know if you've read any of these and what you think of them. So we will talk to you later. Take it easy. Bye-bye.